I'm so sorry that I can't be with you tonight. As someone who's had to use guns for my job, someone who carried guns every single day in Iraq, someone who can say honestly that guns saved my life, this is an issue that's passionate for me. Because I've also seen firsthand the effects of gun violence. And I know that weapons of war have no place on our streets or in our schools. I was at a March for Your Lives rally last year, and I heard a father speak about how gun violence had taken the life of his son. And he got up and talked about the story and the impact it's had on his family. And then he said, "And what has Congress done?" And turning to a crowd of tens of thousands of people, they all said, "Nothing." That was not a proud moment to be standing there as a member of Congress. And because we've done nothing, these tragedies continue, as we've seen in Dayton and El Paso and Gilroy just in the last few weeks. But I believe that because of your work and because of our efforts in this presidential race, that 2020 can be the year that we truly turn this around. So keep it up. An entire nation is counting on you. And an entire nation will be grateful for your work when we finally succeed.
Please direct your attention to the screens for a video message from former Congressman Joe Sestak.
Hello, I'm Joe Sestak, and thank you for letting me say a few words with you, because what you do is wonderful. I served in the United States Navy for over 31 years. We often would board ships looking for contraband in the Persian Gulf with assault weapons, and yet when I became congressman, I fought hard to try to keep those same assault weapons out of the streets of America. There's so much to do for the next president of the United States of America. We must have universal background checks throughout this great land of ours. We must ban assault weapons. We must close the gun show loophole where too many are able to buy from private dealers guns without background checks. And we must close the gun kit loophole where too many buy parts and are assembling a gun, again, without a background check. We must treat guns as a public health issue, not just for the murders, but also because of suicides. The majority of American suicides are by guns. In fact, our veterans also unfortunately commit suicide, the majority of which are by guns. And women in the military suicides, the majority are also by guns. Thank you for what you do. This is an issue that needs to unite America, to bring us together, to have common sense gun control laws. I want to be there with you to make that happen. Thank you for what you are doing very much.
Please direct your attention to the screens for a video message from Tom Steyer.
In 2019, we've had more mass shootings than we've had days of the year. So when we see tragic events like the ones that we saw in El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio, it can make us sad. It should make us feel sympathy for our fellow Americans, but we shouldn't be surprised. This is the absolute result of political corruption. The gun manufacturers through the NRA control the Republican Party and this president, and they've prevented common sense gun legislation. I promise you that as president, we will break this kind of political corruption. I will stand up to protect the health and safety of every single American, and we will get rid of this kind of sickness at the heart of our society and going back to the country we're supposed to be.
Please welcome back Shannon Watts and volunteer leader with Moms Demand Action, Alex Navarro.
I now get to welcome our second speaker from my home state of Colorado. As Colorado's senior U.S. Senator, Michael Bennet has voted to prohibit high-capacity magazines and supported efforts to close the gun show loophole by co-sponsoring background check legislation in the U.S. Senate. In 2016, after the mass shooting at Pulse nightclub in Orlando, he joined a 15-hour filibuster on the floor of the Senate to demand votes on gun safety legislation. As the former superintendent of the Denver public school system and a senator representing a state that has so far seen many tragic school shootings, he understands why it's so important to strengthen our gun laws to keep our children and our communities safe. Please join me in welcoming Senator Michael Bennet.
Thanks, Shannon. My name is Alex Navarro, and I'm the California City Gun Violence Lead. Senator Bennet, if elected President of the United States, how will you prioritize gun safety in your administration?
Thank you, Alex. It will be a very high priority of mine. I've been in the Senate for the last 10 years, and for reasons that we can talk about today, the Senate has been immobilized by Mitch McConnell and the Freedom Caucus. Actually, Congress has, on a whole range of issues, not the least of which are the issues that bring us here today. I think we need a president who's willing to stick with this issue, to make sure we drive it forward. You may have noticed how distracted politicians tend to get. We have a very short attention span. It sort of lasts between the commercial breaks on the cable television at night. That's not going to be enough to get this done. And the work that you guys have done and the work that the Parkland kids are doing to create this movement is what we need to tap into as politicians. So I want to underscore that. This isn't just about who's at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Just as important as that is what the movement looks like that's demanding this work get done. It should have been done years ago. My kids, my daughter Helena's here. She's my second kid. She's 18. Columbine happened in Colorado 20 years ago. And we've done some things in Colorado, but nationally we haven't. So my commitment to you is I will lead and do the political work that's essential to get these background checks done. We need to ban these weapons of war. We need to limit the magazine size. But none of this will happen if we don't mobilize the American people to overcome a broken Washington. And I'm not sure that all the political people in this race understand it. I know you understand it well. Second thing I'd say is, in the first 90 days of my administration, I'd make sure we galvanize every single federal agency in Washington that has anything to do with this issue, from the Department of Justice, the Department of Education, to HHS, to treat this like it is the public safety crisis that it is, and that it is the public health crisis that it is, and make sure that we are doing everything we can administratively while getting Congress to do what Congress needs to do to change the trajectory. Everything that any of us will be able to do has been made possible by the work that you guys have been doing these past few years, so I want to thank you for that.
And Senator, now we have a question from the audience. Kim, who is a Moms Demand Action volunteer from Lakewood, Washington.
Thank you very much. So I'm not only a volunteer, but I'm also a survivor. This is my son, Josh Gatbenton, who was shot and killed on September 3rd, 2008, during an armed robbery when he was staying at a friend's house. And when Josh was 12 years old, he said that he wanted to help people when they needed it most. And of course, I'm here today because I want to continue to help people when they need it most. And that is by pushing forward red flag laws and hoping, as you were just talking about, the background checks. So if the Senate does not pass a background check bill when they come back from recess, what steps would you take to tackle dangerous loopholes as a president? And then what will you do to help people when they need it most and to help victims and survivors, like just only a small percentage of the survivors that are before you here today.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for coming here to advocate for your son and to testify for your son. I can't think of, as a parent, anything worse than having that happen, and I can't imagine having the strength to actually be able to do what you're doing now. But it's what's making a difference in this country. Let me give you an example. You mentioned red flag laws. We should pass a red flag law, although that's not enough, but we should pass a red flag law nationally. In Colorado, we have a red flag law because Tom Sullivan lost his son at the movie theater in Aurora, and like you, said, I'm not going to let this happen again. And he has worked and worked and worked, got himself elected to the legislature. The first bill I think he wrote was a red flag law. It passed in the legislature, and his reward for that is now the gun lobby is trying to recall him from the state legislature. I think about the Sullivans who have been fighting since they lost their daughter in the Aurora shooting as well, who have literally gone bankrupt fighting the gun manufacturers. And I think one thing we could do to help survivors would be to change those laws so that gun manufacturers can be sued civilly in this country for the carnage that they have caused. And I also think the way we can help you best is, and I'm going to be a little bit of a broken drum, a broken record on this, because I'm betting that you didn't hear it from everybody else that came up here. We have to honor your work by being absolutely strategic about how we approach this politically. So you imagined a world where, I'm going to get up for a second. You imagined a world that's not hard to imagine where Mitch McConnell is not going to allow this to come to a vote in the Senate when we get back. I would be shocked if he did. The background checks, as everybody in this room knows, are supported by 90% of the American people. And a state like Colorado, which is a Western state, a purple state, a Second Amendment state, we passed the same background checks almost 20 years ago after Columbine. And every single year in my state, there are 2 or 3% of the people that want to buy guns can't buy guns because they're murderers and they're rapists and they're domestic abusers and they can't buy weapons. And it's impossible to make an argument that we're not safer as a result. But McConnell's not going to bring that vote to a floor. I'll be shocked. He should. He should, because I'd love to see the pressure on senators going to that floor voting against something that 90% of the American people are for, voting against that. I'd love to see that. And so what do we need to do? We need to do what you guys are already doing, but we got to amp it up a level and make sure that every day between now and Election Day, they know this is a voting issue for us. And that we're going to fill the offices in Washington, D.C., and we're going to fill the balconies in Washington, D.C., and demand a vote. And demand a vote. Moms demand action. Moms demand a vote. That's what we should have. And if he doesn't put it on the floor, which I bet you he will not, I would love to be disappointed in him for once in the positive sense. Then we truly do have to make it a voting issue in November. And not just for the presidential election, but in the Senate races as well in this country, so that on the back end of this election, we can actually pass what you need us to pass to support the survivors you're talking about, not just have lip service about getting it done. We have to get it done. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We now have a question from Sarah, who is a Students Demand Action leader in Howard County, Maryland.
Thank you, Senator. As you know, the National Rifle Association leadership has been pushing an extreme agenda and has held an undue influence on too many members of Congress, which it uses to block important gun safety legislation from ever getting passed. As president, what would you do to combat the influence on the NRA? of the NRA?
Thank you. Well, again, the most important thing to counteract the NRA is all of you. So your time, none of what you're doing. You haven't achieved what you want to achieve, but none of what you're doing is a wasted effort. I was once asked I was standing at a fundraiser, speaking of the NRA, and some people said, well, where's the leadership in Congress going to come from here? And I said, this was in the wake of the Parkland shooting. Where did you go? And I said, we have the leadership we need, and it's the leadership that the students are providing from Parkland. It's the leadership that they're providing, that rippling all over America, all over Iowa, all over Colorado, to high schools far and wide, where people are joining together to get ready to overcome this obstacle. And that's what it's going to take to overcome it. Now, we've got issues not just with the NRA, but with pursuing all kinds of things, from guns to climate to a fairer economy for everybody, that is all being screwed up in part because of the way money works in our political system. This is no different. You know, you've heard it said many times, I'm sure, that the majority of NRA folks actually support background checks, but that the money that supports the NRA doesn't support background checks, and that's been a thing that we've had to deal with. And part of what we have to do going forward is reform our government so it actually will respond to movements like this. We need to overcome and overturn Citizens United as part of that. So we put people back into politics and take the money out of politics. And I think we need to end political gerrymandering in this country, which causes people to not represent the majority views of the American people. And I think guns are an excellent example of that, but I stress that there are other issues as well. We can build a broad coalition of Americans to create a new progressive era here, like they did in the last Gilded Age. That's what we were dealing with when Teddy Roosevelt came in, he was ending a Gilded Age, when the legislature was completely unresponsive to the people and completely responsive to the money and to special interests like the NRA. Whether you know it or not, our work today is to end our own golden age and make sure the people are in charge of our exercise in self-government again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Senator. Now we are going to hear from Mary Lasky, who is a volunteer right here in Des Moines.
Thank you for being here, Senator Bennett. We've heard a lot today about the use of guns in crime and suicide. I'd like to hear your thoughts about the use of guns in unintentional shootings, when guns are left unsecured and loaded and often picked up by toddlers or teens, sometimes used, parents' guns in school shootings. I'd like to hear about your thoughts on the responsibilities of gun owners and gun storage.
I think that gun owners should be responsible for, the misuse of their guns, and I think there should be the opportunity to hold them civilly and potentially criminally liable for the things that happen as a result of their failure to store their weapons correctly. And the stories of these accidental shootings are horrendous. You know, again, as a parent, I just can't imagine waking up one day and discovering that had happened to my kid. On school shootings, if I could say one word about that, I was a school superintendent. I think I'm the only person running for president in the history of America who was a school superintendent. I was superintendent of the Denver Public Schools, 95,000 kids. And this is another place where young people are a key to doing what we need done. You know, there's been suggestions that the answer here is to arm teachers. I completely disagree with that as a way of addressing school shootings. Completely disagree with that. But we need leadership in every school district in America to make the protection of our children a priority, and that begins with ensuring that every single culture, every single school culture is a place where people feel safe coming forward to say, I'm worried about that, I'm concerned about that, this doesn't feel right, without worrying that there's going to be some some penalty that they're going to have to pay for having done that. And I want to mention that because that too is not something that a president can do or that a senator can do, but it is something that all of us as parents and kids can do to make sure that there's a plan for developing an intentional school culture like that, because the most important power in America, more than a veto pen of a president, is peer pressure in American middle school or high school. And we need to turn that to a useful and constructive purpose here around gun violence. It won't avoid every single thing from happening, but I guarantee you it will diminish the incidents that we are having in this country right now if people make it a priority. And it will not happen on its own. It's not something that will happen spontaneously. Your school leadership needs to be challenged by you to tell you what it is they're doing to build that kind of culture in their community. And I know all of you realize this. I certainly realize this as a parent of those 3 kids, is that our kids want to be involved in this because they have to sit there day after day after day watching this, and they're asking us, what can we do to help make us safer? Part of it's being involved in a political movement like this. Part of it is taking responsibility for their schools. And I think that's an important way to deal with school shootings as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. So one thing that is a crisis in this country when we talk about gun homicides, we also need to talk about gun suicides. And it's a particular problem among veterans in this country. What are your thoughts on how to address America's crisis of gun suicide?
We have, well, first of all, having a lot fewer guns in the country would be one way of helping address that problem. We are the only country in the world, in the industrialized world, whose lifespan is getting shorter. Can you believe that? Our lifespan is getting shorter for 2 reasons as Americans. One is the opioid epidemic, and the other is suicides, half of which are gun-related. And the countries that have far fewer suicides than we have far fewer guns than we have. So I think it goes back a little bit partly to the question about, are you handling your gun carelessly or poorly, or are you handling your gun well? Do we have red flag laws in place that help us take care of the question that you're asking of suicide as well as attacks that we would worry about? I think the red flag law could help us a lot. And I also think it's important in this context to say that I've got a lot of friends in Colorado and across the country who have kids that have mental challenges. And they worry when mental health comes up in the context of these shootings, because they're worried that people with mental illness are somehow going to be branded as people that want to do violence to other people or themselves. So we need to make sure that that is understood, and that when we talk about it, which is important to do in the context that we're talking about, we recognize that we're not sending that kind of message. And in that regard, let me suggest that the fact that since 2001, we have borrowed $5 trillion from the Chinese. That's the right way to say it. It's not spending $5 trillion. We've borrowed $5 trillion from the Chinese to give tax cuts mostly to wealthy people in America, and have spent another borrowed another 5.6 trillion, sticking our kids with the bill from the Chinese to fight these wars in the Middle East, instead of investing in mental health in America. And we should have a different set of priorities in the White House. We have fewer people in rural Colorado today on mental health, that are there as mental health resources than we did when I became a senator. And we have fewer addiction treatment people too, which is something that also relates to suicides in this country, than we did 10 years ago. I don't think that our parents or grandparents would have stood for this, and we shouldn't stand for it either. This is another one where I hate this. This is McConnell again. This is the agenda that he's pursuing. And by the way, he's not doing it out of fiscal restraint. He and Donald Trump together are now spending more money than any living American politician has ever spent, between the tax cuts and the military spending and the other spending that they're doing. We got it. This is another reason this is about, a political season where we really have to take our exercise in self-government back, and we need to reestablish a set of priorities that's investing in the American people like our parents and grandparents invested in all of us.
Senator, we have about 30 seconds left. What would you tell all of these grassroots volunteers to do in the next several months to try to push this issue to the forefront?
Well, thanks, Shannon, and thanks again for having me. And in 30 seconds, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit. Keep freaking doing what you're doing. And don't stop. And don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop. When the thing doesn't come through in August or September, when he doesn't put it on the floor in September, and maybe they'll put something on there to try to satisfy you, don't be satisfied by that, and don't stop. This has to be something that we're doing day in and day out, month in and month out, between now and the election. And then if we're successful in the election, which I hope we will be, then we need to make sure we finally enact the proposals that you guys have been fighting for all these years. Don't give up. Don't stop. Remember this. It's never been easy. It's not supposed to be easy. It hasn't been easy for the generations of Americans that fought to make this country more democratic, more fair, and more free. It's not going to be easier in the case of gun violence in this country. I'm just grateful that you are taking the leadership that you are taking, and I look forward to the opportunity to work with you as we change our country. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I now have the pleasure of introducing a candidate who has made gun violence a pillar of her campaign since she entered the race. As a former prosecutor, as Attorney General of California, as a U.S. Senator, she has been a vocal advocate for keeping guns out of the hands of dangerous criminals and protecting those who are most vulnerable to gun violence. She has also helped lead a conversation about the many ways our next president can act on gun safety, even if Congress refuses to do so. Please welcome my fellow Bay Area native, Senator Kamala Harris.
Everybody, thank you for what you do. Okay, hi.
Senator Harris.
Yes.
My name is Alex Navarro.
Yes, of course.
I'm the California City Gun Violence Lead.
Yes.
If elected President of the United States, how will you prioritize gun safety in your administration?
Okay. It will be one of my highest priorities, as it has been my entire career. But I just want to start by thanking everybody here. It is extraordinary what you are doing. And, this represents the best of a democracy, when we have people who understand that it is for and by the people and of the people that we have our strength. And what you all are doing is democracy in action, and I know it is not without incredible sacrifice. Some of you who have already sacrificed so much. And I just want to thank you. I see you everywhere I go. And I know that you are, putting aside so many other priorities to make sure that your elected leaders are accountable, and you give us strength and you give us purpose. And so I just want to start by thanking you so very much. So this is an issue I've been working on for years. We were just backstage talking about the work that I did, years ago, even with Michael Bloomberg when I was district attorney of San Francisco, the work that we did in California when I was attorney general, some of the work with Gavin Newsom, who's now governor, and then the United States Senate, and now as a candidate for president of the United States. And I will tell you, I'm done. I'm done We have been having this conversation for far too long, and it is not like we are waiting for another tragedy. We have seen the worst of human tragedies. It is not like we are waiting for a good idea. All the good ideas have been had. My friends on the debate stage have great ideas, which I support. We do not lack for great ideas. What we lack is the United States Congress to have the courage to act. The courage to have the courage to act. The courage you display every day when you're traveling around this country at your own expense, showing up places, making sure your voices are heard, and speaking on behalf of the people that can't be here. And I'll tell you, I mean, most recently, even what we witnessed in El Paso, and people are asking me, well, what's going on? I mean, listen, what's going on is that coupled with the fact that we have not had reasonable gun safety laws, and I'm prepared to put it in place. I am prepared, when elected, to give the United States Congress 100 days to pull their act together on this and put a bill on my desk for signature, and if they do not, I will take executive action. I will put in place a comprehensive background check requirement. I will require the ATF to take the licenses of dealers who violate the law, and I will put in place by executive action a ban on the importation of assault weapons into our countries, because we need action. But the bottom line is also, we need a president of the United States who, on related topics, such as the hate that we are also seeing being displayed, which is manifesting itself in lethal proportion like what we saw in El Paso, we also need a president of the United States who understands that one of her greatest powers is to use this microphone in a way that is about not beating people down, but lifting people up. People say to me, did Donald Trump cause those folks to be killed? Well, no, of course, he didn't pull the trigger, but he's certainly been tweeting out the ammunition. So let's take all of these issues seriously and work together for a unified America where we all understand there is so much that we each as individuals have the power to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. And we now have a question for you from the audience from Sarah Dubois, who is a volunteer here in Iowa with Moms Demand Action.
Okay.
Hi, Senator Harris. You've spoken out about how gun manufacturers and the NRA are able to influence Congress and keep them from passing strong gun safety laws.
Yeah.
But the gun lobby has been able to get Congress to give gun manufacturers special protection from civil liability unlike anything in any other industry in the form of PLCAA.
Right.
As a former Attorney General, how would you work to hold the gun industry accountable even while PLCAA is still on the books?
Well, one, we have to, I believe we actually have to work to repeal it. And I have been an advocate of that for a long time, because there needs to be an opportunity for people to have a day in court to litigate these issues, and a court will decide. But to have this shield against responsibility is not in the best interest of justice. So that is how I think of this issue. The other issue I'll say is this. We need to also, and as president, I will ensure that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, can study the effect of gun violence as a public health issue that is creating crisis and trauma in our communities. One of the related issues that I talk a lot about, and you all know, is the reality of the trauma that is resulting from this in a number of ways. One, a child having to go to sleep each night hearing gunfire, where that child is taught, honey, if you hear the guns firing, jump in the tub because that's a safe place to avoid a stray bullet. The trauma resulting from exposure to gun violence. The trauma resulting from having a protocol around how to honor a child under the age of 18 who has been killed by gun violence. There are whole protocols in communities around our country around how to mourn a child who has been killed because of gun violence in their own community. Let's also talk about the trauma experienced by our babies, elementary, middle, high school students who are going to school every day to endure a drill during which they are taught about how to crouch in a corner or hide in a closet in the event there is a mass shooter roaming the hallways of their school. I talk about this publicly all the time. I can't tell you the number of 8 and 9-year-olds who will come in, usually I'm wearing a suit, tugging at my jacket in kind of almost a conspiratorial voice, really low. I had to have one of those drills. Our babies are sitting in classrooms where they should be focusing on their teacher and the wonders of science and math and art, and instead half their brain is concerned about what might come running through that door carrying a gun. There is so much trauma that our children are experiencing because of this, that is having profound and severe consequences to their life, even if a bullet never actually touches them. So we who are supposed to be responsible, we who are adults, have a primary responsibility to ensure and think of the safety and well-being of our children. I will tell you, I strongly believe you should judge a society based on how it treats its children. And on this issue, we are failing. We are failing.
Thank you, Senator. I would now like to turn to a gun violence survivor who is in the audience. Her name is Mia, and she is from Los Angeles. Mia?
Hi, Senator Harris. Thank you so much for being here. I'm proud you're my senator.
I'm going to come down to you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I get a hug?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ask your question.
Earlier this week, while addressing the El Paso and Dayton shootings, President Trump mentioned some proven gun safety reforms, but also blamed video games and social media for the shootings. We know that people in peer nations play video games and use social media just like us, but the US gun homicide rate is still 25 times higher. How can supporters of gun safety overcome those distractions and get legislators to focus on proven policies that we know will actually save lives?
That's right. And thank you for your courage. So, listen, elections matter. Elections matter. I mean, here's the thing, is, people got to be held accountable, and if they don't have the courage to vote in the best interest of their communities, they need to be elected out of office. And because elections do matter, so you mentioned the President of the United States and the statements he made, which I believe are, the statements he made around El Paso, as with so many of his statements, are just empty gestures. It was an empty gesture. He had a moment where he could have spoken to the reality of it. And let's be really clear about this. His moment was not only the moment of the President of the United States to speak to the core of the issue and the reality of the issue. It is also a moment where it happens to be that his party is actually in power in the United States Senate, which is where a bill could go to pass. So really be clear about this. If he said, hey, Mitch McConnell, bring that House bill over here, by getting it through the Senate, it would happen. It would happen. So I say put your money where your mouth is for all these people. And enough with the prayers, enough with the thoughts and prayers are with you. We could never mourn as much as you are mourning and have mourned the loss of your child or your loved one. So to prance around pretending that this sympathy is so deep, you know how it is translated to me to be something that really is about sympathy and empathy? Is act on it. Act on it. So that's what I say in response to that. Elections matter. And so I encourage everyone, this is obviously around, a lot of folks are here. We're all here. My friend Michael Bennett was just here. We're here. We're running for president. It's about the White House, but it's also about the Senate races. It's also about the House. It's also about your state elections. As Attorney General, I was able to do work that was about pushing back against laws that would prevent consumers from suing. And consumer rights issues. It's about attorneys general. It's about governors. It's about mayors. It's about sheriffs. All of those elections matter. And so let's stay engaged as you've been. Thank you.
And Senator, we now have a question from an amazing Students Demand Action leader named Marco. He has spent his summer running our chapter in South Central Los Angeles.
He's over here. Okay, I got it. Took me a minute. Hi, Marco.
Hello, Senator Harris. I'm from South Central Los Angeles. I've seen firsthand that gun homicide does not affect all Americans equally. Black Americans are 10 times more likely than white Americans to die by gun homicide. Much of this violence is clustered in specific neighborhoods in our cities. Can you talk about the especially heavy burden gun violence places on Black and Latino communities in major cities, and on solutions you believe are most effective? And I think what would be really interesting is that in your response, if you could include how members of the media, I want you to look them, do me a favor and look them in the eye and tell them how they cover Black and brown homicides.
It's really well done. Really well done, Marco. To your point, I mean, in terms of my personal experience with this issue across the board, when I was district attorney, I haven't told the story a lot, but when I was district attorney, I'd be sitting in my office and one of the receptionists at the front desk of the office would come back and say, "There is another mother here." And that lady would have shown up at the front window and she would say, "I want to talk to Kamala. I only want to talk to Kamala." So I'd go to the front window and I'd bring her back to my office. I'd never met her before. And we would sit on the couch in my office and she would cry. And she would talk about how nobody was taking seriously the fact that her baby had been killed, her adult son. And how she would cry and say, if my child died of cancer, people would have a level of sympathy or empathy. If my child died in a car crash, they would treat me a certain way. But because my child died as a result of gun violence in the streets, they are treating him and me like a statistic and not honoring me or giving me the dignity of a mother who has lost her child. And you couldn't be more correct in the way that you said that. The media, America, has come to believe and accept, therefore, the killing of, in particular, young Black and brown men in America. And this is one of the things that I actually applaud about many things about the Parkland. What came out of the Parkland tragedy was that there was, by young people not waiting for permission to lead, and understanding that what happened in Parkland is aligned with what has happened in major cities, in urban areas, and in communities of color around the country for decades. And you couldn't be more right. Our young men, and in particular our young Black and brown men, should not be thought of as disposable. It should not be expected and unsurprising when they are killed. And back to the point, the loss of any life and any child in our community is the loss of a child in our community and should be treated as such. What can we do? Well, there are a number of things. Back to the earlier point that we were discussing about trauma. I've worked on this for years, which is the issue of undiagnosed and untreated trauma among children who are exposed to violence. Those same children who grow up from a very early age going to the funerals that happen in their community. And so what we need to do around diagnosis and treatment, because that untreated trauma leads to, as you can imagine, that child going to school the next day, and we expect that child to learn. What are they doing? They're acting out. They are reliving what has happened to them. They are experiencing a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. But what happens when they're in the classroom? They start to self-identify and be identified as the unruly kid, as the bad kid, as the disruptive kid. And so in a very short matter of time, they're the kid who, is kicked out of the classroom. They're the kid who can't pay attention because they've got all this other stuff they've experienced. And then predictable outcomes occur and cycles continue. So part of it has to be, one, understanding the trauma that is induced because of violence, and then treating it as a public health matter, which means not only studying it by the CDC, but also putting resources into mental health and community health in a way that we recognize that untreated, this trauma will lead to all kinds of outcomes, which, by the way, for those people out there who don't care about people, well, care about your pocketbook because you're paying for it too. And so let's just deal with it in that way. But it does get back to your point. There are two sets of rules on this one. For so many of these young black and brown men, they are considered a statistic when they are killed. And we have to come to terms with that by speaking this truth, as uncomfortable as it makes some people feel, and then deal with it in a way that we respond to violence in those communities in a way that is with love and care. So thank you. Oh, we're out of.
Senator, in the last 30 seconds or so, what would you ask us to do as grassroots activists and volunteers?
Keep doing what you're doing. I know that there are many here who, for example, were, and I know many of the leaders are folks who were involved with MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, years ago. That was such a powerful movement, and this is such a powerful movement. The moms and the dads and the aunties and the uncles and the cousins and the brothers and sisters and friends who are Moms Demand Action, your voice is such a pure, authentic, real voice, and it has so much power. And I know it is not without sacrifice and incredible frustration when you have to know what happened just, in the last week. But just stick with it, because you have the power, and I do strongly believe the power is with the people. The power is with the people. And movements are never easy. Movements are never easy. But this is the reality of these fights, that we must remain vigilant, and we will see progress. And so I say, stick with it. History is going to show that you were the leaders who made something happen. History is going to show that those who are feckless and lack courage were on the wrong side of what was evident around what should happen in the best interest of the health, safety, well-being, and strength of our nation. You are the leaders right now, so keep leading, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Wonderful to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next candidate entered the race for president by talking about another important issue I know many of us care about, climate change. but to the very large network of Moms Demand Action volunteers, students, and survivors in his home state of Washington, he's also known for being a strong champion of gun violence prevention. After getting elected governor of Washington, he helped lead the fight for meaningful gun safety reforms that Everytown and Moms Demand Action fought hard to pass. Please join me in welcoming Governor Jay Inslee to the stage.
Oh, thank you.
My question to you is, if elected President of the United States, how will you prioritize gun safety in your administration?
Thank you. If I can take a minute or two to talk about this. First off, thank you for being here. Alex, thank you. Shannon, John, thank you for your leadership. Can we just have a round of applause for Shannon for what she's done? It's remarkable. We sat next to each other in the plane flying here yesterday, and she told me about her journey to make this happen, where she was inspired just by the tragedies we've all suffered. And to me, it was so inspirational because fortunately it's happening all across the United States. Moms, dads, grandmas, grandfathers, uncles, aunts, we've had a belly full of violence and it's time to act. And I just want to thank you for what you're doing here personally in so many different ways. John's leadership, Gabby Gifford's leadership, thank you for what you're doing. I'll just mention three things quickly as far as how I would act as President of the United States. It is how I have acted as a member of the U.S. Congress and as a governor. Just a quick story. In 1994, I was a freshman legislator from Yakima, Washington. It was an agricultural rural Republican district. And the bill to ban assault weapons came up. And I knew that if I voted to ban assault weapons, I would lose my seat in Congress. I want you to know that I voted to ban assault weapons. And although I lost my seat in Congress, I have never regretted that vote for 1 nanosecond, because it was the right vote then and it is the right vote now. And now, to show the power of this movement and the power of moms and dads, now in my state we have passed 3 major gun safety legislation, leading the nation on extreme risk protection orders, leading the nation closing gun loopholes, leading the nation requiring training for folks to get semi-automatics. Now I can report to you, we have the NRA on the run in Washington State, and I intend to get them on the run in the United States of America if I'm given this high honor. So that's how I would intend to act. But we know there is an intersectionality between gun violence and violence in general. And I have been confronting a person in the White House who is not in tune with the best virtues of the United States. He has spent his entire career dividing us, fanning the flames of racial division. And so during the second debate, a week and a half ago, I said that it was time to get white nationalism out of the White House. And I believe that. And somebody asked me why I said that. And the reason is because we've trained all ourselves. You see the placards in the airports. If you see something, say something. Well, I see racial animus in the White House. This man needs to be a blip in history, okay? Well, that's what I believe. So I have proposed a 10-point plan. I think it's one of the most comprehensive plans to defeat gun violence and white nationalism. It involves engaging the whole administration to finally put resources on the white nationalism terrorism front, engage the ATF, ban assault weapons, close the Charleston loophole, stop the lie and try program, and use our entire government to do what it should, which is to protect us all. I want to mention one other thing that was actually not in my proposal, but I was thinking about it this morning. Another person I want to thank in this effort is my wife, Trudy. She, of 46 years. She has stood by me after I lost my seat in Congress. She has, yes, that took some courage, actually. She has stood by me on many of the things we've done to reduce violence in general, not just gun violence. We have to dedicate the federal government to reducing domestic violence in this nation. We have to increase social and emotional learning in our children in our schools to teach people how to disengage from violence. We need how to teach our police officers how to de-escalate violence, to reduce violence across the United States. And I will mention those are some of the things, and I'm looking for easy questions and gentle criticisms. Thank you.
The first question we have for you from the audience actually comes from a couple, John and Regina, who are Everytown Survivor Fellows, and they live in Trenton, New Jersey. John and Regina?
Good afternoon, Governor.
Good afternoon.
So our son, Trey, my one and only son, was shot and killed on September 22nd, 2012, due to a senseless act of gun violence. Someone shot into a crowd of people and took my baby. But he sacrificed his life to save 2 girls. He died a hero, but my pain will last a lifetime. So tomorrow is the 2-year mark anniversary since the Charlottesville, Virginia white national rally. And a week ago, a white supremacist opened fire at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, killing 22 and injuring 24 more. How do you plan to stop white nationalist gun violence, and how will you disarm hate?
Could you share your son's name?
His name is Trey.
Trey, I want to tell you that we are honoring him today in this effort. And I want to tell you that I think Trey's spirit is alive not only in this room, but across the nation. And I think you would be pleased to know that this room represents tens of thousands of people across the country who have Trey's spirit with them. And his spirit is alive in the United States. And when you talk about disarming hate, obviously we know that love drives out hate. We know that. That's been said. We know that there is a clear thing we need to do, which is to reduce those who fan hate. Those who look for hate as a political opportunity need to be removed from places where they can do damage. Those who, for instance, lied about Barack Obama being born in Kenya for political purposes, that kind of person should not be in public office. They should be removed. People who, after Charlottesville, said there were good people on both sides. A person who said that members of the U.S. Congress who are people of color should go back where they came from, and that language was essentially used by that murderer in El Paso. We need to remove the person in the White House who is accommodating and ennobling and enabling white nationalists to go where we don't have to listen to him anymore. But I want to say something in addition. It is not just him. Unfortunately, we have seen thousands of other office holders in his party who are complicit in his racist behavior by not speaking up. If you see something, you need to say something. And the Republicans who are afraid of the shadow of Donald Trump also need to be removed from public office. I believe that. That's what I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. We now have a question from someone who lives in your state of Washington, Judy Schneider-Wallace.
We moved to get closer. We're the Washingtonians right here. So good afternoon, Governor. And I'm from Mukilteo, Washington. And my husband, Paul, bought a shotgun, shot and killed himself in the same day of September 2011. So I know firsthand what it's like to lose a loved one to firearm suicide. With evidence that access to firearms increases risks of suicide by 3 times and domestic violence death by 5 times, it is essential that we have a way to remove guns from people who show signs that they are a threat to themselves and others. Our state passed the important laws, but most states still do not have them. What are your views on red flag laws, and how do we implement and fund them at a federal level?
Thank you. And this is, I know you'll agree with me in your loss, and thank you for being here. Guns kill people, and that's a central premise. And you need to understand that as you do, because suicides are as much or more as homicides in the United States. And the pain you feel is just as great as someone who lost a family member of homicide. And so we need to understand that the presence of guns in homes dramatically increases the possibility of suicide and homicide. Dramatically. Guns effectively have made people in a more dangerous situation than in a safer environment. And this is particularly true on those who've had difficulties of depression and mental illness. So I'm proud, and I want to thank you for your leadership in our state, where our state is one of the first that have passed an extreme risk protection order, that have had red flag laws, that have allowed us to help people be safer by removing guns when we have that type of issue. Now, we also need to do a lot more than that, and I think the Democratic Party needs to lead on this. While we are increasing universal access, and I'm proud that our state has passed the very first public health option in the United States to move to universal health care, which we need. While we have done this, we also have to make sure that people have adequate mental health treatment in the United States. This is of critical importance, and we are way behind the curve, including in Washington. We do not have the mental health care system that we need yet. People ought to be able, when there's a family member, actually get help in a timely fashion. And by the way, people and our students, we had a terrible tragedy in Mukilteo of young people with a multiple shooting. We had 5 people shot in Marysville High School just north of Seattle. We know this, and I told Donald Trump this when I went to the White House last year. He wants to arm first grade teachers with Glock pistols. That is not the answer. And I told him he needs to stop tweeting and start listening to educators. Because educators know what we want is better mental health treatment for our young people and more counselors so we can deal with this, so we can reduce real violence. Thanks for being here. Good to see you.
And Governor, our next question is from Alex, a Moms Demand Action volunteer here in Iowa.
Hi, welcome to our state. Every day in this country, 100 Americans are shot and killed, yet federal funding to study gun violence has been severely suppressed for decades. If elected president, how would you ensure there is adequate funding to research the causes and most effective solutions to reduce gun violence?
Well, I think that we need a lot more money going into research because this is a public health crisis, and we need to think of it as a public health crisis, not just a law enforcement crisis. So I think we need a lot more money going into research in the public health aspects of this and a lot less going into mansions for NRA executive directors, okay? That's kind of what I think. And I do think thinking of this from a public health standpoint is very important, in part because of the enormous loss due to people losing their life because they take their own lives. We think of gun violence just from the homicide standpoint, and when we think about it from a public health standpoint, we start to think of the mental health aspect of this. So this is really, really important, and I want to thank you for asking it. And what we're finding is that under Donald Trump, he has essentially tried to stop any meaningful, effort by the federal government to keep us healthy. He has, if not zeroed, dramatically reduced our efforts against white nationalism. Look, these folks have been identified by the FBI as the most frequent part of our domestic terrorism problem. But he's dramatically reduced the funding that goes to that. You've pointed out that they've sort of put a gag order on real, it wasn't just him, Congress did it as well, on research on this effort. So we will keep banging the drum, and I want to thank you. By the way, may I ask where you live in Iowa? Pleasantville. Well, Pleasantville might have a caucus here in a few months, and I'll come by and see you at that caucus. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. So, Governor, last question for you. If you could give us some advice on the best way you think we should leverage our grassroots power this summer and beyond, what advice would you give us?
Well, thank you. You're doing such a wonderful job now, and the journey you've been on personally, what you've done with this organization is so impressive. I'm reluctant to give you advice. So this is stream of consciousness. I guess one thing I would say is realize your power. And I think that's important. I think sometimes people who haven't been elected to public office or don't have, belong to a major media empire don't realize their power. I think that's really important to realize how much you can affect your family, your workplace, your church. Everyone here is a publisher now. Everyone here has a moral purpose. And I guess I would say, number one, realize how powerful you can be. Number two is to realize how many venues you have for making progress in this regard. Obviously, we want you to help get a good president elected and members of the U.S. Congress. But these are issues for school boards, where we need school boards to embrace social emotional learning so we can teach people to reduce violence in general. They are local communities and local law enforcement to deal with domestic violence, something I was involved in as a young assistant city prosecutor at times. There's a lot of ways to make a difference. But there is something that is important as well, is that we got to elect people who got the gumption to stand up on this subject. And I say this because I think you're going to see in the next several weeks or months an attempt for some politicians to try to let the pressure off on this issue that exists without actually solving the problem. You're starting to hear some language out of some of the Republican senators that have sort of said, well, maybe we'll do a little bit about this so these people in red shirts will just leave us alone, okay? That's not good enough. Extreme risk protections are good. Closing the gun show loophole might be good individually, but we need the full meal deal against gun violence in the United States. And we need, that's why we can't let them just make this a public relations issue. Now, there's another issue, and this plays in my race, if I can make a comment about my race for a moment. We have to understand, too, look, this community is looking for progressive change in our laws so that we can keep Americans safe. Change today in the way we really need it is impossible if we continue a rule that prevents progressive change in the United States. We cannot allow a rule in the United States Senate that if we have 59 votes for gun safety legislation, allows Mitch McConnell to say, no, my bosses at the NRA aren't really down with that, so I'm not going to do it. We have to eliminate the filibuster in our democracy so that we can make positive change in this country. And so far, almost all of the senators, except Senator Warren, want to retain this filibuster. I just disagree with them on this. Now, this has to do with all of the progressive change we need to make. Look, I believe this. I believe that the young people of America deserve to be protected from gun violence and not have to be afraid going to school in the morning. But I also believe they need a federal government to defend them from the ravages of the climate crisis. And we have to provide them a way to build a clean energy economy. And we will not be able to do that as long as the filibuster exists. So there is one thing I hope you might add to your portfolio. It might be there already, I'm not really sure. But when you talk to members, I hope that you can do this. And thank your families for the work you do. I thanked my wife today, and I hope you will thank your spouses. And and families that allow you to do this work, because they're part of a noble effort, and I want to thank you very much. Oh, one other thing. Can I say one other thing? I'm running for President of the United States. And I hope if you've heard some things you like, you might want to keep me on the debate stage. And to be on the debate stage for debate 3 and 4, I need 15,000 more willing Americans to go to jayensley.com and send in $1. So if you know anybody with $1 who might think you want gun safety and the climate crisis on the stage, go to jayensley.com. Thanks a lot. Early in bed, early rise, work like hell and organize. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
As mayor of the largest city, as mayor of the largest city, is it on now? Okay, there we go. As mayor of the largest city in the United States, our next speaker understands the risks that guns pose to cities and the people who live in them. But he also knows that cities like his are limited in what they can do to stop the flow of illegal guns onto their streets if the states right next door have weak gun laws. He's a member of Mayors Against Illegal Guns and a fierce advocate for victims and survivors of gun violence. He speaks passionately about the effects of gun violence on Black and brown Americans. Please welcome to the stage New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. My question to you is, if elected President of the United States, how will you prioritize gun safety in your administration?
Thank you very much. And I want to start by thanking every town, thanking Students Demand Action, Moms Demand Action, Shannon, Alex, everyone for what you're doing here. This is so important, but I particularly want to thank the activists who are here, everyone who every day in your cities and towns is making a difference. So I want to ask you to just do me a favor, look around this room at the folks who are making change, who are standing up, who are making a difference. Give your neighbor a round of applause, please. I hope you won't mind if I share a little message for President Trump. Mr. President, it's not Hollywood. It's not video games. It's the guns. It's the guns that are the problem. Stop shifting blame. Stop making excuses. You're the one who can do something about it. Take those tiny little hands of yours, pick up the phone, call Mitch McConnell, and say the Senate has to vote for gun safety measures right now. And while we're at it, I have a message for Walmart. It's not the displays and it's not the imagery that are the problem. It's the guns. So long as Walmart keeps selling guns, you're part of the problem. And to everyone at Walmart, let's speak a blunt truth right now. You are putting profits over the lives of human beings. That's what's happening. And it's not acceptable. So my message to all Americans, if you have a choice in where you can shop, it's time to boycott Walmart. It's time to stop putting money in the hands of a company that puts guns on the streets that kill innocent people. Now we have power. And I want to say this very quickly to everyone here. I honor you and admire you. But we have power. To everyone watching, we have power. And a lot of times we talk ourselves out of our power. We shouldn't do that. Because we have the power to go at the gun industry right in their wallets, right at their bottom line. And I want to tell you something we did in New York. And as President of the United States, I would work to do this everywhere in the country. In New York, we divested from the gun industry. We took money away from that industry. We took our pension fund investments out of that industry. Guess what? There's a lot of better places to invest than in the gun industry. And you know what? they depend on that money. And everyone in this room knows the gun industry and the NRA have a very close symbiotic relationship. When you go at the gun industry, when you take resources away, when you undermine them, you're undermining the NRA. They cannot live without each other. But right now in this country, pension funds, I'm talking about city, state, counties, labor unions, universities, foundations, they're all still giving their money to investments in the gun industry. Now imagine if every one of us could use our power to stop that. Imagine what it would mean if we showed the American people no longer want to invest in those merchants of death. What a difference it could make. Every one of us can take that action. Are you ready to take that action? Are you ready to make a difference? One more point I want to make to you. You know, right now, we're fighting, every single person in this room is fighting for common sense changes. We're using our political power, and like I say, let's use our economic power too. But there's something else that we can do in every city and town of America to get guns out of circulation and to protect innocent lives. And that's something else that we're doing in New York, which is to bring our police and our community closer together. This is a country where if we're going to really be safe, we've got to break down the barriers that have existed for too long, the distance that has existed for too long between police and community. And what we have found by working for justice, by working for fairness, we're bringing police and community closer together. People are talking to each other, working together, respecting each other. And that means we're finding out where a lot more guns are. A lot more information is flowing, a lot more collaboration, coordination, mutual respect. We're supporting the Cure Violence movement. Grassroots folks helping to make their neighborhoods safe. While we're fighting for the bigger changes, we can save lives right now if we create a new approach to policing. And I can tell you it works. I run the nation's largest city. We have seen that safety and fairness must walk hand in hand. That's what we need in America. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor. We have a question for you from the audience from James Farmworth, and he is a Students Demand Action leader in Minnesota. He's right over there.
Good afternoon, Mayor. I'm James Farnsworth, a Students Demand Action leader from Minnesota. A recent analysis of mass shootings showed that in 51% of incidents, the shooter exhibited warning signs that they posed a danger to themselves or others before the shooting. Earlier this year, New York passed a law that allows family and law enforcement to ask a court to temporarily remove guns from people who are a risk to themselves or others. Research shows that these extreme risk laws can also reduce the risk of firearm suicide. Do you support extreme risk laws at the federal level?
James, thank you so much for your question and everything you're doing. I 100% support those laws, and I'm speaking as someone responsible for the safety of 8.6 million people. And when you are personally responsible for people's safety, you realize a lot of things wrong that need to be fixed. And the notion that we know someone is a danger, that it is thoroughly clear, and yet in America somehow there's not a way to address it. That comes home to me all the time. We need laws that make abundantly clear when someone is at risk to themselves or others, they have no right at that point to have a gun. They have no right. We have a right to protect everybody else. We have a right to protect them. And that's the change we need. But I'll tell you, this is such an example of what we've got to fix in the whole public discussion. Because, you know, first of all, there are some who are trying to tell us that just those laws are the only thing we get. And I believe in what you call them red flag or any other version, anything that allows us to get at dangerous folks, I want. But we should never be told that's enough. We should never be told that's enough because we need a host of changes to truly keep people safe. I'm in a city where illegal guns flow in from states all over the country. We have some of the toughest gun laws in America, and you know what that does? That keeps us safe. We have lowered crime 6 years in a row. We're the safest big city in America, and we also have some of the toughest gun laws in America. It fits together. Tough gun laws protect people. They protect law enforcement. And we as a movement need to talk about this. A lot of times, the person who's most endangered by an illegal weapon is a law enforcement officer. And they deserve better too. So yes, red flag laws and laws that protect people from harming themselves or others, but let's go a lot farther than that. And I want to say to this audience of change agents, I really believe in my heart the people are listening more and more. And I wish it didn't take tragedy after tragedy. What we saw in these last days, worse it feels than we've seen so many, but it's getting worse because now it's about white supremacy, it's about political motivation. But I do see people moving. I see people open to change and willing to participate in change like never before. So I say an emphatic yes, and I believe we have the moment where we can finally get that done and a whole lot more. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. We now have a question from Glenda, and she is a gun violence survivor from New Jersey.
Good afternoon, Mayor. My name is Glenda Torres Scott from New Jersey. I'm a survivor fellow and a survivor membership lead. My family was forever changed when my son Benjamin Davila was shot and killed on October 10th, 2012, at the age of 23 in Trenton, New Jersey, on the porch of my parents' home. To this day, no one has been charged. As mayor, you established an Office of Gun Violence Prevention in your office and have dedicated funds through the crisis management systems to support community groups working to intervene in these areas hardest hit by gun violence. The programs are local, but what can be done at the federal level to support these highly effective initiatives?
Thank you. Glenda, I first of all want to say as a dad, my heart goes out to you, and I can't imagine the pain you've been through. But I just really admire you because the pain can cause people to turn inward, or some very brave souls turn it into something for everyone else. I just want to thank you for standing up and for the changes you're making. Let's thank Glenda for what she's doing. Glenda's raising this very powerful point. So for those of us who are making change at the local level, there is no possible barrier in my mind between taking something, a change and innovation and improvement we make locally, and making it something for the whole country. It's true that when you run a city or you run a state, there are some things that you can't do because the federal government won't allow it or the federal government won't support it. But the other way around, can we take something that worked at the local level and bring it to the whole country? Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Because the federal government has the power to legislate, to incentivize, to fund, to support, to use the bully pulpit of the presidency to make change. There's so many ways to do it. What I described earlier, neighborhood policing in New York City, neighborhood policing is about bringing police and community together, creating a real dialogue, that mutual respect. It's breathtaking how much safer it is making us. We trained our entire police force to de-escalate conflict. We gave every officer implicit bias training. And we see a whole change taking place. That can be applied to this whole country. But you mentioned the Cure Violence movement and the crisis management system. And just for folks who don't know it, this is this incredibly powerful way to stop violence. Because change comes from the grassroots. Can we just affirm this for a moment? We want change in Washington. We're going to fight for laws. But really, ultimately, change comes from the voice of the people. It comes from the grassroots. And you represent change, everyone in this room. We don't wait for it to come from on high. We build it from right down on the ground. That is America. The Cure Violence movement, the crisis management system, is predicated upon something incredibly powerful. That people who have experienced violence in their neighborhoods, even folks who ended up on the wrong path, ended up incarcerated, that folks can come back from those experiences and make change and make things better for everyone else. Our police do extraordinary work, But that ability to reach deeply into a community, to have conversations that no police officer or government official could ever have, real-world conversations, community member to community member, people who have experienced violence and crime and incarceration, talking to other people, particularly young people, and saying, this is not the life for you, believe me. Folks who can intervene when something is brewing, when an act of retaliation may be coming on, or some violence may be coming on, that they can intervene and stop it. This is working right now in New York and a lot of other places. And this is one of the ways we save lives right now. While we fight for the laws and the changes we need, we can save more lives right now. Everything I just described to you is working right this minute. The city of New York is funding it. And there is nothing, I've been mayor for 6 years. I have rarely been more moved than being in a room with folks who redeem themselves and then help to stop violence and help others to a better path. That's what we believe in. It can be done. So Glenda, yes, that should be federally supported. Cure violence organizations all over this country should be federally supported. It should be a movement we build everywhere. And one last thing on this, if you want to hear people tell you it works, talk to precinct commanders of the NYPD who have seen that movement save lives and stop violence before it happens. It can work. Thank you very much, Glenda.
And we have a question now from Zach from Seattle, who is a gun violence survivor.
Survived being shot in the Route 91 Harvest Festival shooting back in October 2017, and her and her husband know better than just about anybody what it's like to literally run for your lives. She happened to do it with a bullet in her back, and we're fortunate that we still have her. Just this week in Times Square, a backfiring motorcycle caused that same exact panic, and a huge crowd ran, dispersed, people were injured. Now we've got Amnesty International issuing travel alerts because of how insane the gun violence epidemic is here in America. People are afraid to die just by existing here. I know for me, I can't remember the last time I left the house and didn't wonder if I was next. I know the students that are here wonder if they're next. And now we have people potentially not even wanting to come visit our big cultural centers like Times Square or other places. So I guess the question is, can you talk about what the impact of having such a gun violence epidemic that causes global fear can have on America, be it economic or otherwise? And then I have kind of a follow-up question that's unrelated, but that I wish I could ask every single candidate, which is, when these lights are off, whether or not you make it to the presidency, will you continue to stand up and fight for the people in this room who have survived gun violence? Will you keep fighting regardless of whether or not you make it to the office? Because we need that. We need people with your platforms on the ground with us trying to prevent this from happening to other people.
Amen.
Thank
Amen.
you.
Zach, thank you. Zach, I'm going to speak to your question. I think you're saying something so important, and please give your sister my best, and thank God she is still with us. That panic in Times Square told us another thing that we all know, but the whole country had to see. The whole country's on edge. Everyone's afraid at this point. This horror has become a national norm, and it can't go on. It just can't go on. I'm going to be in this fight, whatever office I hold, or whether I hold office or not. And again, the real change is going to come from the grassroots. I'll be shoulder to shoulder no matter what. But I think what we have to recognize is that this is not a business as usual moment. I know everyone here feels that, but we have to create that urgency. It's not a business as usual moment anymore in America. And that's why we have to use some approaches that might have not been what we assumed before. Because people keep dying, And it is not just the lives we lose, it's the trauma. My wife has focused her efforts in New York City on mental health. And she's educated me how many of our children are being traumatized by the violence around them. And I'm in charge of a school system with 1.1 million kids that now has to go through drills all the time. And those kids are worried in a way they never were before. So we're setting back a whole generation. And this is not what we as Americans can allow. So I'm asking everyone, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I want to say it very simply. We need to use every tool, and we need to use some things we didn't ever use before. And that's why I say we take money out of the hands of Walmart or anyone else who is threatening our communities. Just take the money away from them. Take the money away from the gun manufacturers. If there's anyone out there who says that the most important solutions are legislative and political, in many ways I agree with that statement. But if you want to get to those legislative and political solutions, we better up the ante. We better raise the heat. And a lot of folks who are making money right now have to feel that business as usual is not going to work for them anymore. So everyone, the whole country is feeling these tragedies, but they're feeling this bigger crisis. We need to say to every parent in America, this can't happen to your children. They can't live this way. They can't live in fear all the time. That's not America. And the folks who are allowing it to happen, they have to feel our wrath. We're a movement that believes in peace. But right now, they have to feel our wrath for change to happen. I know you can do that. I know you can let your heart and soul out, and it can change this country. Thank you. God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Thank you.
Really, Myron, appreciate you.
I appreciate you. I'd like to now introduce you to another Democratic candidate who proudly served our country, putting her life on the line during a 12-month tour in Iraq. In fact, she's still serving our country in the Army National Guard today. As a member of the House of Representatives, she's also one of the few candidates who's had a chance to actually vote on some of the life-saving measures that all of you are fighting so hard to advance, including a federal background check bill, closing the Charleston loophole, and reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act with new protections for domestic abuse. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard.
Hello, Congresswoman. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
The question we'd like to ask is, if elected President of the United States, how will you prioritize gun safety in your administration?
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you to Shannon and John and the many hands that came together to bring us all together here today. And thanks to all of you for giving us the opportunity to come and engage with you on this critical crisis that is before us as a country. And it is an urgent crisis. I want to send my aloha, my heart, and my respects to the families and the victims in El Paso and Dayton, but really to the families and those who have lost loved ones in all of these shootings that we have seen across our country. I can understand how that pain stays with us as we remember those we lost. As Shannon mentioned, I have stood on the House floor as we have called for action over the last several years in Congress to pass common sense gun safety legislation. and been frustrated and heartbroken every time we are faced with inaction, frustrated and heartbroken every time we see another shooting, see more of this senseless loss of life, and the lack of leadership. The lack of leadership that recognizes that this is not a Democrat issue or a Republican issue. This is not partisan. This is not something that only affects one part of our country but not another. This is something that impacts all of us and that each of us needs to recognize the urgency of and the need for us to come together and stand together for each other, for one another, for our children, for our loved ones, for our families. As president, it's important to provide that leadership, and that's the leadership that I seek to bring. We have the opportunity to bring our country together, to transcend the hyper-partisanship and the divisiveness that has stood in the way of progress on this issue for far too long, and to do the hard work of reaching out to people, to build those bridges, to heal these wounds and say, look, none of us want to be in a position where we send our kids off to school in the morning fearing whether or not they will come home. None of us wants to see a brother or sister or parent go off to buy some groceries and not be sure whether they'll come home, or to go to church on Sunday, or to go about the daily things that we do in our lives, living with this fear that what happened in El Paso, that what happened in Dayton could happen to any one of us. This is about passing common sense gun safety legislation and bringing together Democrats and Republicans to do so. It's about keeping up the pressure on leaders in Washington to say, we're not going to allow you to turn a blind eye. It's about addressing the multitude of issues and challenges that we face in this country. It's about dedicating resources towards those who need help, making sure that these guns don't end up in the hands of those who could use them to cause harm to others. But ultimately, it's about bringing about this culture change and this shift that we need in our society, where otherizing or dehumanizing or objectifying people in a way that allows them to commit these atrocities has to be overcome. And we do that by recognizing who we are as people. Who we are as people. That while we come from many different places, we have different backgrounds, different political beliefs, ideologies. When we come together as people, recognizing and respecting each other on this common ground, thinking about those we love and the future that we hope for them, this is how we can begin that tough road and that necessary road forward towards real progress, towards making sure that we do have safe and secure schools, communities, churches, and societies. So my hope in all of the ugliness and the pain and the heartbreak that we are seeing here is that this is what can come through, that the many voices we're seeing across the country that are rising up and saying, no more, no more, that motivated by this unifying spirit of love that is more powerful than anything else, we can overcome the obstacles that have stood in the way of progress for far too long. And I'm proud to stand here shoulder to shoulder with the activists and the leaders and the survivors and people from across this country to make sure we continue down this path and not allow anyone to stand in our way. Thank you very much.
Congresswoman, our first audience question for you is from Yvonne, and she is a gun violence survivor in California.
Good afternoon, Congresswoman. Like you, my dad served our country in the military. In his 60s, my dad struggled with chronic pain. One night, the pain was too much, and a gun was too handy. He died by gun suicide. I know all too well the pain that comes from having a loved one take their own life. 100 Americans are shot and killed every day, and hundreds more are wounded. 2/3 of these deaths are gun suicides. Gun suicides have risen in recent years, particularly among veterans like my dad. Now gun suicides are beginning to rise among teens. As president, what would you do to address the gun suicide epidemic in this country?
Thank you so much for your question, and appreciate you sharing your own experience about your father and the tremendous loss that you went through. Well, that hasn't happened to anyone in my family. One of my soldiers from my second deployment survived multiple deployments in combat and came home a few years later only to lose that battle and took his own life. Making sure that we are providing care and having that care be accessible to those who need it, whether it's to kids in school, to veterans, or to every single one of us, so that no one is in this position where they feel like they are hopeless or all is lost and they have nowhere else to turn. This is what we must make as high of a priority in this country as we do to make sure everyone gets the health care they need if they have cancer, if they fall sick in any other way. I think one of the big problems and challenges, and I can speak to this as a veteran and as a soldier, is there is such an unfortunate stigma that exists around those who need help but are afraid to ask for it. You know, I see as whether you're soldiers or airmen or Marines or sailors or coasties as warriors for this country, that difficulty is even greater to admit vulnerability and weakness and that you need help. And too often still we see this epidemic of suicide in veterans across the country, almost 20 every single day on average, taking their own lives. We're seeing more of the challenges coming through with children in school, elementary, middle, and high school, who are coming maybe from traumatizing situations at home or difficulties and challenges, and who are feeling that sense of loneliness and powerlessness. The fact that we are not making it a priority to destigmatize mental health in this country and to dedicate the kinds of resources that we need is a failure to our brothers and sisters, to our loved ones, our parents, and our kids. Just as important as it is that we go to the doctor for a physical or a health checkup, we have to make it a similar priority to make sure that we have the mental health care that we need.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I would now like to hand it over to Crystal, who is also a gun violence survivor, but from Ohio.
Thank you. I stand here as an Ohioan from the state of Ohio, with now a city that carries the hashtag Dayton Strong. I also stand here as a grandmother, a kinship provider, a member of grand families, but even more importantly, I stand here as a broken mother who struggles daily with wondering if I spend more time grieving about one child than the other. My 23-year-old son, Donnell, and my 29-year-old daughter, Janaea, were both shot and killed by my daughter's estranged husband, April 1st, 2015. Domestic violence is a huge issue in our country, and the combination of domestic violence and guns is often deadly. Federal laws do not allow felons, domestic abusers, or fugitives to have guns, but the law does not cover people with other types of violent criminal histories. Some states, including your home state of Hawaii, do not allow people convicted of other violent offenses to have guns. Should the law be expanded to cover violent misdemeanor offenses, in addition to those convicted of felonies or domestic abuse from having guns?
Yes. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. We're all here with you and standing with you. And we grieve with you. Your strength and your power in coming here today is incredible, because you are speaking not only for your children, but you're speaking for so many others. And you're carrying on this fight so that no one else has to go through what they have gone through and what you have gone through. There's absolutely no reason, no excuse that our laws currently today do not stop someone with a history of violence from owning a gun and being able to perpetrate that violence once again and taking the lives of another person. This is exactly the kind of common sense change that should have been made long ago. Recognizing that our laws cover only certain violent offenses but not others, or certain intimate partners but not others, and as you pointed out, recognizing how many people suffer at the hands of those who are closest to them. There should be no obstacle standing in the way of us as a country, as leaders in this country, from making sure that our laws protect people from those who have already proven they'd harm others, who would prove to be even more dangerous when they have a lethal weapon in their hands. I admire you so much for being here today and for speaking out as you are. It is your voice and your story that has the power to change a nation. All of you here, I just thank you so much, because by you opening your heart, and I can't even imagine the pain that you go through in doing so, you can change so many people's hearts in the process. This is the change that we need in this country, so that no more lives are lost. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Crystal, and thank you, Congresswoman. Our next question is from a Moms Demand Action volunteer in Iowa.
Hello, Congresswoman. I'm a volunteer with Moms Demand Action in Iowa. You come from a state with both strong laws and low rates of gun violence. And you have voted for a number of strong gun safety policies in the House of Representatives. What do you think the odds are that the Senate will act on any of the gun bills sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk? And what can we as advocates do to get them to finally do something?
Thank you for your activism and your work. It's moments like this where we've got to keep up the pressure. There is absolutely no excuse for Mitch McConnell and the Senate to stay home and out of Washington when they have legislation that's been passed with bipartisan support from the House of Representatives that can bring about the kind of change in gun safety laws that we need to see. To make vague statements about, well, we'll come back in September once the recess is done and then we'll take a look at those laws is absolutely unacceptable. We, the people, we as a country need to keep up the pressure and to call on Mitch McConnell and the Senate to come back into session today, tomorrow, immediately. This is not a matter of convenience. Well, maybe inconvenient, they have other plans, maybe they're traveling to other places. No. We're talking about people's lives, a matter of life and death. The way that we get our lawmakers to do their job and to do what needs to be done is to remind them that we, the people, are the ones who hire and fire these elected leaders. The power is in our hands. Now, we know there's a lot of money, there's a lot of influence, and there's a lot of powers that be who make it their business to stand in the way of any kind of gun safety legislation from being passed, and we see how they act. We see their tactics. But we always have to remember that no matter how much money they have, especially in this age of social media, we have an incredible ability to organize and to raise the volume in our voices and to not let up the pressure until they remember that they work for us. So that's the mandate, that's the challenge, that's the task that we all have before us, is to keep that pressure up, to continue to call on them to get back into session in the Senate. There's no excuse. Those bills are waiting. They can be brought to the floor for a vote immediately. They need to do the right thing for our country and for all of you and the people in this country.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for all that you're doing. Know that we stand with you as we move forward in this necessary fight. Thank you.
We're waiting a second.
Our next speaker is someone who understands the solutions for ending gun violence are not limited to ideas generated by Congress or state legislators. As a businessman and an entrepreneur, Andrew Yang knows the complex problem of gun violence will require engagement from the private sector and innovation from the gun manufacturers themselves. He has talked about holding the gun industry accountable while highlighting the role that gun suicides and city gun violence play in this epidemic. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Andrew Yang. Thank you so much for being here. My question to you is, if elected President of the United States, how will you prioritize gun safety in your administration?
First, I want to thank everyone here for your passion and leadership in activating our country around the epidemic of gun violence. I just want to applaud you all for being here. I'm a parent myself. I've got 2 young boys who are 6 and 3, and I cannot imagine coming of age in an era where school shootings are so commonplace that students are doing active shooter drills in their schools. And my goal is to see to it, my boys are too young right now to understand what's going on in our country, and I want to see to it that hopefully by the time they arrive in school, that we don't have a need for these drills anymore. And you're all making that happen. I just can't thank you enough. As president, I would prioritize attacking gun violence on many, many fronts, because we have to know this is a very multifaceted problem. I believe I'm candidate number 17 on this stage today. And I have a feeling you've heard a lot of the same things from each of us. And it's because we're aligned. We're Democrats, we agree, we have to get these laws passed, we have to beat the NRA's lobbying, we have to really activate the will of the American people because the vast majority of us agree on these issues. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that I would emphasize that are a little bit different than the other candidates, though those are the core things we need to get done. So a couple of things. I'm a numbers guy. 3% of Americans own 50% of the guns in this country. So if you do the numbers on that, that means each of those individual Americans owns dozens of guns. The gun ownership is very much concentrated in the hands of a certain number of people. The raw number of guns in this country is between 300 and 400 million. That's one gun for every man, woman, and child in the country. So whatever we do, we have to try and reduce that supply of guns over time. Because if you have a country that has that many firearms, even if we effectively pass some of these laws, that's not going to get that supply down very quickly. So one thing we should do is we should follow the example of other countries and have essentially a perpetual gun buyback, where anytime anyone wants to sell their gun, we'll be like, we'll snap it up from you just like that. And we should have a $1 billion fund just letting people know, like, look, anytime you get tired of the guns, you can even trade in the old one you don't like as much anymore. Like, we'll give you good value on it. And that'll actually be a really good pitch to some gun owners, because we have to get the supply down. The second thing is we can work with the gun manufacturers to try and make the gun safer. And the thing that makes me so upset is that whenever, I mean, there's so many things about this that are incredibly upsetting to all of us, but when there's a shooting in this country, did you know the stocks of gun manufacturers actually go up? Now, why is that? Because people buy more guns because they're afraid of regulation. So if you're a gun manufacturer, what are your incentives to try and make your gun safer or reduce mass shootings? Zero. You actually make money when there's a shooting, as long as you can hold the line on legislation. So one of my proposals is to fine gun manufacturers when their guns are used in a mass shooting. Because, like it or not, in this country, money has overrun so much of our politics, money has overrun so much of our society, and if you're a gun manufacturer, you gotta hit them where it hurts. You say to them, do the right thing, they don't care. You say, hey, anytime your product gets used in a way that kills American citizens, we're gonna hit you in the wallet. Do you think that might change their attitude? Yeah, that would work. It's about one of the only things that would work. And so what we do is we have them, in economic terms, it's called internalizing the cost. It's like right now we're all bearing the cost. Our families, our communities, our children. We have to put the cost back on the gun manufacturers. And then when the gun manufacturers come to the table and say, okay, I hate getting fined, I hate the PR associated saying that this was my product, then we say, here are the things you can do that'll make us safer. So you can make it so that you don't have these interchangeable parts that allow you to upgrade guns in ways that make them more dangerous for people. As someone who loves technology, did you all know that you can actually have guns that are signature guns that can only be fired by the owner that recognize you based on the grip? So it's not a fingerprint thing, it's just like the size of your hand, the pressure from different fingers. A lot of gun owners would actually like that because it makes their gun more personalized. It's like a James Bond gun. No? So you can pitch this and say, your gun, only you can fire it, and that makes us safer. Because then if that gun owner's child gets a hold of the gun, they can't do anything with it. So what we do is, and right now, that technology is not being applied in the marketplace because the gun manufacturers don't think it's in their interest. So we have to make it in their interest, and then we have to push personalized guns out in the marketplace that will make us all safer. So here are a couple of the things that I think I'm proposing that are a little bit different. On the lobbying side, again, money has overtaken our society. So how are we going to make it so that the NRA lobby loses to the people? You all have been passionate and volunteering for years, and we still have not gotten this done. And it's not because of a lack of passion or activism on your part, clearly. It's because, again, our government's held captive by the money. So the solution is to put 100 democracy dollars in the hands of every American that enable us to just have $100 a year that only we can give to our candidates. This would wash out the lobbyist cash by a factor of 8 to 1. So then if you're a legislator and you do something that makes us happy, we give you $100, that's like, over time it's millions of dollars, and then the gun lobbyist says, hey, I've got 100,000 for you. They'll be like, I don't care about your 100,000. I'm getting millions from the people of the United States. So here are some of the big moves that we have to make to try and make ourselves safer. I'm aligned with the Democrats on all of the things we have to do, but we have to do more than that. And the final thing I'll say before I start taking questions, over 96% of these shooters are men. We know this. There's a collapse in masculinity in this country, and we have to do what we can to try and avert that collapse. because it's one of the major contributing factors to our being less safe. So thank you all for your passionate leadership. I'm looking forward to spending more time with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Our first question is from Stephanie, and she is a gun violence survivor in Las Vegas. Stephanie?
My beautiful 4-year-old daughter, Dayla, was struck by a stray bullet March 2011. My son, my daughter's twin brother, witnessed what happened that day. She died 2 days later. Firearms are the second leading cause of death for children and teenagers in the U.S., but 4.6 million American children live in homes with at least one gun that is loaded and unlocked, and hundreds of them gain access to a gun and unintentionally shoot themselves or someone else every year. As president, how would you address unintentional shootings by children?
Thank you for that. Can I give you a hug? Is that be appropriate? I have a 6- and 3-year-old boy, as I'm imagining. I was imagining it was one of them that got shot, and the other saw it. I'm so sorry. The biggest downside of running for president for me has been that I don't get to see my family very much. So I get pictures, I FaceTime, I see pictures of my boys, and just that scene that she described, I'm sorry, it's like very, very affecting. You're right that when there's a gun in the household, you're more likely to have a child get shot or the owner get shot than to kill, let's say, an intruder into the house. Those are just numbers. Those are just the facts. So one of the things we can do, and it's very hard to get into Americans' houses where all of these guns are, but if we can convince Americans that personalized guns are a good idea, then again, if the child gets a hold of the gun, then they can't do anything with it. Then it just becomes a very heavy, expensive prop. And that's something that we can push. One of my proposals is to actually help gun owners upgrade their guns to personalized guns free of charge. Because if we can do that, then again, if you're a gun owner, and gun owners are parents, gun owners understand that, and some of them are concerned. So if you say, hey, we'll upgrade your guns for free, when we can do that, like you can upgrade the guns for free, and that would help make kids safer in our homes. I'm so sorry you had to, and that story should not be possible. I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you so much. We now have a question from Corrie Pennebaker, who is a gun violence survivor from Wisconsin.
May I call you? Oh, is this on? Is this on? Oh, there it is. May I call you Andrew?
Yeah, of course.
Awesome, because I'm sure we're friends by now. My name is Corrie Pennebaker, and I am my mother's voice. It'll be 40 years this coming September that my mom shot and killed herself. My mom's name was Joyce. She was only 27 years old. I was only 20 months old. I don't know what my own mom's voice sounds like. I don't know what it's like to have my own mother tell me that she loves me. Gun suicides like my mom's happen every 25 minutes in this country. It's the most ignored, but yet it's the most amount of gun deaths in our entire country, but yet we don't talk about it. But since you're a numbers guy, this is something that I'm sure that you're going to know. I think you've already talked about it, that we know that access to a firearm increases the risk of suicide by 3 times. And you know who else that knows that? The entire gun lobby knows. They simply don't care. Yet it has done little to warn, the gun industry has done little to warn purchasers in the community of the risks of suicide. Now, Andrew, can you tell us how you would get the gun industry to adopt responsible business practices that warn of the risks of guns so that no one ever has to walk for a second in my shoes.
Your numbers are spot on, where if you have a gun in the house, then the odds of self-inflicted gunshot and suicide shoot way, way up. And the odds of that happening also are much, much higher again than the gun being used to protect the household. So the gun manufacturers obviously know this. And what's interesting is many gun owners actually know this too, because many of them have had friends and acquaintances who have committed suicide using a gun. And it's actually one of the more it's disastrous, but it's not, your story, as you know, is not just you, and that it's happening around the country. So hand in hand with this is that we have a mental health crisis in this country. We all get depressed. The question is, when you get depressed, do you have a gun in the house that enables you to do something irreversible and catastrophic that you would regret immediately, the next minute, the next moment? If there was, like, this may betray some darkness inside of me or something, but like if you had like a self-destruct button on your body and you just hit it and then you immediately like disappeared, like I have a feeling like a lot of us would have hit it at some point in our lives, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's like you just be like, and I can disappear now, and then just hit that. It's like, and so the problem is that these guns actually empower those dark thoughts or feelings in us that often pass, but in the moment they can become, so overwhelmingly powerful. So on this side, we have to own the fact that guns are more likely to be used in these terrible catastrophic ways inside the home than in a productive way. We have to educate gun owners. We certainly have to take the gun manufacturers again and try to have their incentives get aligned to this. So in this way, we can find the gun manufacturers when their guns are used on the owner, and then we can fund mental illness approaches. I see gun ownership in the same way I see some other things, like let's call it tobacco. You guys know what tobacco, they got hit by various legislation, and then we all see these anti-tobacco commercials. It's like Truth, and there should be a version of that for guns. And so this way we can elevate awareness around the dangers that guns pose to their owners, and educate the public, and hopefully empower more people to avoid those catastrophic, irreversible moments.
And now we have a question from Elliot, who is a Students Demand Action volunteer in Michigan.
So I'm a volunteer with Students Demand Action in Michigan and on the advisory board, and we've heard you talk a lot today and throughout your campaign about technology and the future that we have in technology and how it can change our culture. But what I'm worried about is the future of technology and gun safety. And we talked about good things today, like the personalized guns where it's got your fingerprint or whatever on it. But there's also people who can go on the internet and find a gun seller and buy it without a background check. And there's people who can 3D print illegal gun blueprints in their basement. So what will you do? What can we do in order to make sure that technology does not endanger our communities through these methods?
Thank you for the question, Elliot. And if you know anything about my campaign, you know that I believe that technology is very much a double-edged sword. It's certainly not an absolute good. There are many, many negative impacts of technology. And what you describe, 3D guns as an example, the big danger around 3D guns is that you can make guns that are not made out of metal that can evade metal detectors. But right now, those sorts of guns are very low on the list of public health concerns because, frankly, it's just so much easier to get a normal gun. You know what I mean? It's like, why would I need to print a gun if I can just go to Walmart and buy these guns? And the 3D printed guns tend to be less destructive in terms of firing capacity and rounds. They tend to be more of they're not automatic weapons for the most part. Let's put it that way. In terms of using technology to procure weapons illegally, I couldn't agree more. It's a massive problem. And it's one of the big frustrations I have around the conversation we have on gun control is that even if we were to pass some of these common sense laws, my great concern is that it wouldn't meaningfully affect the supply of guns in the country, and it wouldn't meaningfully affect access if someone wanted to go on the black market on the internet and find a gun. So we have to know that these rules are not going to be a cure-all, and then we have to penalize. If you sell a gun illegally to someone in this country and it ends up getting used, we should be coming down on you like a ton of bricks. Like I would certainly have my Department of Justice and FBI be curbing illegal gun sales on the internet if we can get our arms around the legal supply. Because right now the legal supply is much more likely to get a gun into someone's hands right now. Again, the black market isn't as necessary if you can walk into a Walmart right now and buy a gun in many instances. But you're 100% right, technology is going to cut both ways.
So in the 2 minutes or so that we have left, what would be your clarion call to action for this grassroots movement over the next months and years?
Again, I admire your passion and activism, and I sense that many of you have been personally touched by this issue in a way that breaks my heart. Like the fact that we could have so many people here who have been touched in some way. And it's not just you, obviously. You could fill football stadiums and towns full of people who've been touched by gun violence. What I'd ask you to do, and this is going to sound crazy given everything you've already done, but I want you to think bigger. I want you to think bigger about the sort of issues you want to address. Because to me, gun violence is like the last step in this disastrous chain of events. And what we're doing right now is we're looking at the last step, or the last two steps, which is how did this person get a gun, and then how did they end up killing themselves or someone else? But there are typically many things that happen before those last two steps. And as a problem solver, I know that often the earlier you can go back in that chain, the better off you're going to be at remedying the end result. So we have to think bigger about the society that has led people to those last two steps. We have to attack the last two steps with everything we've got, with our heart and soul. But then we also have to try and make families stronger, schools stronger, mental health, culture, particularly young boys who end up becoming young men. And then, if things go wrong for them, unfortunately, they are much, much more likely to end up doing something either destructive to others or in some cases self-destructive. So I want you all, and I know this is an incredible ask of me, but I want you to think even bigger about the kind of society we have to build so that we can genuinely pass along a society free of gun violence to our children.
All right, so I'm going to do the intro to Brenda now. Okay, you're going to go off now?
I thought I was supposed to walk off with him.
I'm now honored to introduce our last speaker, Brenda Moss. Obviously now a rock star. Brenda is a Moms Demand Action volunteer from Lynchburg, Virginia, and a member of the Everytown Survivor Network. Her oldest son, Sean, was shot and killed in 2014 when he was 34 years old. Since then, Brenda has become a passionate and tireless activist for change, working to save the lives of others from preventable gun violence. She has said about her son, "He was not a number, he was my blood, and I'm going to give him a voice." Here she is today, speaking on behalf of Sean and in honor of all victims and survivors of gun violence in America. Please welcome Brenda Moss.
Thank you.
Well, it's been a long day, huh? Took me 2 days to get here, but I'm here. And the reason that I'm here is because I promised to give my son a voice. My name is Brenda Moss. I am and always will be the mother of Sean Moss. Just to tell you a little of Sean's story and why I fight so hard and why I hold you all so close. Sean was killed on August 26, 2014, just 10 days after his birthday. He was lured to a place by a friend that he hung out with, and the guy waited until he was standing in the middle of the street, and he shot him in his back. He didn't shoot Sean just one time. He didn't shoot him twice. He didn't even shoot him 3 times. He shot him 17 times. He ran, sat in the bushes, watched Sean die, and then ran some more. So it took us like a month and a half to find him, not who killed him. We knew who killed him, but to find him. And like I've always said, I had 2 choices. I could lay down or I could get up. There was no in between. There was no gray area. And coming from a mama that taught you how to survive, you already knew what your choice was. So you got up and you put one foot in front of the other with tears streaming down your face, and you would say his name to anybody that would listen. To anybody, it didn't matter who it was. Because when there's a drive in you, there's nothing that can stop you. I come to you today as Moms Demand Action to say to you that there is a drive in you. There is a force in you that cannot be stopped. There is nothing and no one that can hold you from electing the right people to the right office to stop the gun violence in this country. There is no one. No one and nobody. How bad do you want it? Want it bad enough for Sean and every survivor in this room? Let me tell you just how bad you are. I walked through the airport today, and 3 ladies said, I like that shirt. 2 of them said, I'm going to get one, and I'm getting my husband one. That's how bad you are. I walked into the prison yesterday, and a young man said, I saw y'all on TV. He's in prison. So let me tell you something. You got a voice. You better keep on talking. And you better keep walking. And you better keep making phone calls. And you better keep knocking doors. And you better make these ones that's up for candidacy prove what they said. We sick and tired of talking. Be about your business. Understand that there are victims out here that need to be honored. You're not going to keep overlooking us. You're not going to keep talking to us like we nothing. You're not going to keep giving my son a number like he's just a statistic. No, he's not. He's Sean Wendell Moss, and he's my son. So I need you, if you're standing by somebody, I need you to lock arms with them right now. Lock arms, because we don't have no weak links. We don't have weak links. We are stronger better together. We are better together, and we heal better together. And let me tell you why we heal better together. Because I'm very necessary. That's why we heal better together. Lock arms like you mean it. And if you feel a weak link, you hold them that much tighter. If you feel like you're getting tired, you lean on somebody. If you feel like you want to give up, you think about Sean. You think about him and understand, I'll fight until my last breath. So we just want to thank y'all for coming today. We want to thank the center for holding us. We want to do all of that. But what we really want you to know is we coming with force and we coming with power. And we won't stop until we get what we come for. Give yourself a hand, because you bad to the bone. Thank you, Moms Demand Action, for showing up, for doing what you know to do. Thank you for showing up on Sean's behalf and every survivor that's in here. And thank you, Shannon Watts, for being the commanding officer. See, because you can have an army, but if it's not strategic, it ain't gonna move. So we thank Shannon Watts for believing in this, and that meant she believed in us. So thank you for coming today. Get back out there. Because I'm going back. Let me tell you something. You got to have a I'm going back with or without you attitude. And I'm going back. And I know y'all going to join me because we're a bad red shirt army.